field where both are often in short supply, and we have been fortunate to have him on our program committee this year, and we are so delighted to have him to guide us through these very important sessions in very important times. Please join me in welcoming Philippe Auclair.
Right, it all goes downhill from there. Thank you, Stanis, and thank you all. I'll be very brief because the next 90 minutes, I think, will be go like a flash. I hope so anyway. Each of our 5 speakers has been allotted 10 minutes, and 10 minutes, not one more. I've got the dreaded yellow and red cards in my pocket for the presentation. And I don't think we'll have a short debate as well after the presentations between the 5 members of the panel, and then we'll open, obviously, to the floor for the questions, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of those questions given the title of this session, as Stanis was saying, the upcoming battles between sports and politics on US soil. And the only problem I have with this title is the word upcoming, because you'll have seen that, for example, a few days ago, the US authorities denied visas to the delegation from Iran, which was supposed to attend the official draw for the 2026 World Cup on December the 5th. And of course, Iran has qualified for this World Cup. So the battles have already started. To start the session, I'll call to the stage Jules Boykoff is here, a professor of politics and government at Pacific University in Oregon, also the authors of 6 books on the Olympic Games. And the title of his presentation is Sports Washing, the FIFA 2026 World Cup and the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. And Jules, the stage is yours.
Thank you. My presentation today has 3 parts. First, I will define sports washing, spotlighting its key components. Second, I'll explain how sports washing is unfolding in the United States as we approach that 2026 FIFA World Cup and the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles. And third, I'll present my political assessment of what this means for our current conjuncture. I define sports washing as when political leaders use sports to appear important or legitimate on the world stage, while stoking nationalism and deflecting attention from chronic social problems and human rights woes at home. Sports washers use sports to try to burnish national prestige and to convey economic or political success. Analysis of sports washing can slip into 2 forms of intellectual quicksand. One ideological and the other analytical. On the ideological front, there's a tendency among both academics and journalists to only apply sports washing to authoritarian settings. But sports washing can also emerge in democratic political spaces, as I'll argue today. On the analytical front, when people ask if sports washing works, the subtext is typically whether it affects global audiences. And yet, sports washing is also designed for domestic constituencies. Sports mega-event organizers capitalize on the opportunity to thicken their ties with other domestic power brokers. National and local governments use the events to strategically multiply and militarize their weapon stocks, to create special laws during the sporty state of exception that they'd never be able to get away with during normal political times. Let's be clear. All of these sports washing dynamics are very much unfolding in the United States right now. During the bid phase for sports mega events, and even for a short while after the city or country is granted the event, leaders can claim they'll help address the entrenched social issues. For example, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti went on late night television and said this.
I'm confident by the time the Olympics come, we can end homelessness on the streets of LA.
And while running for office, current LA Mayor Karim Zidan said this about homeless encampments.
I do believe that when the Olympics comes in 2028 and I'm mayor, there won't be encampments.
But once reality sets in, such promises often slide to the wayside. Donald Trump has used sports to his political advantage in ways that are unprecedented for a US president. And he often talks about how the World Cup and the Olympics are among the events in his second term that get his heart beating the quickest. He's already using sports to appear important on the world stage while stoking nationalism bolstering the militarized state security apparatus, and deflecting attention from domestic social problems. He has a willing accomplice in FIFA President Gianni Infantino. Infantino appears so often at the White House that they might start charging him rent. And in fact, he's actually paying rent to Trump because he set up a FIFA headquarters in New York City in Trump Towers. You can see Infantino snapping photos in the VIP section at Trump's inauguration, only a few rows behind former US presidents. You could see him gifting Trump with his very own FIFA Club World Cup trophy. You could see him accompanying Trump to the tournament's victory ceremony, where Trump awkwardly celebrated alongside Chelsea FC. In May, Infantino even showed up late to FIFA's Congress in Paraguay because he prioritized accompanying Trump on a tour of the Gulf over running his own organization. Infantino and US soccer baron Carlos Cordero even offered Trump some autocracy tips.
The yellow card is a warning, right? And when you want to kick out someone, you should run back.
That's true, right? That's very good.
So this could be useful, I don't know.
Yeah, I like that.
That's for you.
I like that. The next media session. Thank you.
The next media session, suggested Cordero. More recently, Infantino joined Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office to announce that December's World Cup draw will take place in Washington, D.C., making it as convenient as possible for Trump to sports wash. Infantino documents the bromance on his Instagram feed, whether it's posing with Trump in the Oval Office, snuggling up to him at the Club World Cup, or hanging out with Trump's son, Eric. Deflecting attention from entrenched social domestic problems and human rights violations is a key element of sports washing. So what is Trump attempting to deflect our attention from? Well, it turns out many things. Oh, you know what? I missed the best part. What I was going to say about Infantino is, you get the picture. He might not be able to take a corner kick, but he's shooting his shot when it comes to cozying up to Trump. So what is Trump deflecting attention from? Well, many things, it turns out. There is low approval ratings. There's a relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. There's the lingering inflation that he promised to fix on day one. There's the ever-weakening US dollar. There's the fact that the US is edging toward a recession. But it's important to note that sports watching in the US is a bipartisan affair. Democrats have been more than happy to help. For example, President Joe Biden gifted Trump with a secret weapon for his sports washing arsenal, the National Special Security Event designation, or NSSE. Biden designated the LA Olympics as an NSSE some 4 full years ahead of the Games, the furthest in advance of an event ever. Well, what does this mean? For starters, it means that the NSSE is already in effect. Second, when an event such as the Olympics, a Super Bowl, a military parade is designated a national special security event, it triggers widespread latitude for numerous federal agencies, including Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. This is a huge deal for a city like Los Angeles, where some 1 million people are undocumented residents. ICE has been running wild in Los Angeles, at times looking like an invasion force. The security crackdown on ICE protests, featuring the National Guard and even Marines, offers us a frontal view at what mega event security might look like over the next 3 years. So sports washing is not just about soft power, it's about amassing hard power that can be used to suppress political dissent. And it's not just Biden with the sports wash assist. There's also Casey Wasserman, a longtime Democrat Party donor and the chair of the LA 28 organizing committee. At an event in August celebrating the White House task force for the Olympics, Wasserman smiled along as Trump suggested using the US military to police the games, and while Trump vowed to ban trans athletes. In fact, Wasserman was one of the first to clap at Trump's anti-trans rant.
I also want to welcome the chair of the US Olympic Committee, Gene Sykes. Gene, thank you. Thank you, Gene, very much. And thank him for recently banning men from competing in women's sports. That's a big deal. Thank you very much. It's amazing the way I don't hear any applause for that when everyone feels it.
Wasserman profusely thanked Trump, even claiming, "We wouldn't be here without you." He also presented Trump with a set of Olympic medals from the 1984 LA Games, praising Ronald Reagan along the way. Meanwhile, the LA 28 organizing committee has been completely silent when it comes to the terror that ICE is inflicting on Los Angeles, declining to comment when asked about it by the press directly. When you put these pieces together, it is clear that under the spell of sports washing, the US is a dangerous country to visit during the World Cup and Olympics. After all, even Native Americans are being detained by masked immigration and custom enforcement agents. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor recently warned that the Trump administration has all but declared that all Latinos, US citizens or not, are fair game to be seized at any time. Under such circumstances, how can fans from Latin America expect to be treated? Civil liberties are dwindling quickly, and Trump's response is not exactly generating public confidence.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me.
ICE reportedly now has invasive spyware technologies. Phone searches at the US border have hit a record high. And Trump's promises sound a whole lot like threats.
We'll do anything necessary to keep the Olympics safe, including using our National Guard or military. Okay?
Then there's Vice President J.D. Vance's jokes to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem about placing World Cup tourists in detention.
I know we'll have visitors probably from close to 100 countries. We want them to come, we want them to celebrate, we want them to watch the game, but when the time is up, they'll have to go home. Otherwise, they'll have to talk to Secretary Noem, who I'll turn it over to now.
These jokes are no laughing matter, and if you don't want to take it from me, then take it from Bad Bunny, who's not even going to go on tour in the continental United States for fear his fans might get apprehended by ICE. We're living in serious times where sport is politics by other means. With the World Cup and Olympics looming on the horizon, now is the time to deeply consider the complex political machinations of sports washing, and I look forward to doing that with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jules, for a very interesting address and for being such an absolute superstar with the timing. And our next speaker is also from the USA. She's an habitué of Play the Game, and she's Minky Worden, Director of Global Initiatives at Human Rights Watch. The title of her presentation is Excluding the World from the World Cup, US Policies Pose Human Rights Risks for Global Sport. And welcome to the stage, Minky.
Thanks very much. Greetings, everyone. I'm going to pick up on one of Jules's great themes, which is how federations are not necessarily defending their own human rights policies. This is opening with a moment from March of this year when FIFA President Gianni Infantino met with US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Let's watch for the dynamics of that relationship.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to be establishing a task force, a very important task force, White House, and that's on the FIFA World Cup of 2026, which, as you know, is a big event. It's going to be the biggest event, I think. And Johnny, I think you're going to say a few words. Everybody knows this man on the right. He's sort of the king of soccer, I guess, in a certain way. And he was the one that was able to give it to us, and we're going to do a fantastic job in making you at home. So I would very much appreciate it. First time it's ever been in this part of the world.
No.
And it's an honor. Thank you very much, Johnny.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President. Well, it is a great achievement to bring the World Cup next year, the FIFA World Cup in 26 here in the United States, together with Mexico and Canada. And this summer, actually, we have a new competition, the FIFA Club World Cup in 25, from the 14th of June to the 13th of July, only in the United States of America. Very good players playing in Europe, but we need to bring them back here.
So can the U.S. win?
America will welcome the world. There will be millions of people coming, Mr. President, millions of people.
Millions of people. Thank you. In 250 days, and it's days that we're counting, the World Cup launches in the US, Canada, and Mexico. It was supposed to be the largest and most inclusive sporting event in history. 48 nations, an estimated 6.5 million attendees, a truly global celebration. But as the World Cup approaches, there is little to celebrate. Instead, a beloved event for billions is being weaponized by the Trump administration to foment divisions while rolling out policies that conflict with US and FIFA human rights obligations. Human Rights Watch continues to report on conditions in Canada and Mexico, but because the US is hosting the vast majority of the games in 11 cities, and due to the severity of recent US legal and political developments, my remarks today will focus on the US as a host nation. After anti-LGBT discrimination and North Korean slave labor deaths at Russia's 2018 World Cup and thousands of migrant worker deaths building Qatar's 2022 World Cup, FIFA said that it would take steps to end human rights disasters at its events. As a result, FIFA adopted the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights in 2016 and a human rights policy in 2017. When FIFA awarded the 2026 tournament, it was hailed as the first time when a World Cup had a human rights strategy, and as a major break with past FIFA practices of awarding events without human rights due diligence. But here's what's happening instead. This is the White House task force. Donald Trump named himself the chairman of the task force, something that even Vladimir Putin did not do. My remarks today, like Jules, will cover three areas. One, risk to visitors to the United States. Two, risk to people inside the US. And three, what you can do. So in the audience, can I see a show of hands? How many of you plan to travel to or work, maybe as a journalist or as an academic, at the 2026 World Cup? Show of hands? Yep. Fewer than I would have thought. Since January 2025, the US has announced executive orders and policies targeting protesters, journalists, human rights defenders, immigrants, LGBT people, and civil society. On June 4, the Trump administration issued an executive order barring entry for visitors from 12 countries with severe barriers for 7 more. And although the order has carve-outs for World Cup athletes, any ban on visitors based solely on nationality contradicts human rights and the World Cup values of global participation. Iran, for example, has already qualified to play in the 2026 World Cup. Tens of thousands of Iranian fans traveled to cheer their team at the last 3 World Cups, including women who couldn't go to their own stadiums in Iran. Under the current US ban, these women, these fans, our friends, won't be able to come to the US at all. US authorities are reportedly preparing further travel restrictions, and if implemented, fans from 48, that's 48 of FIFA's 211 member associations, almost 1/4, could be prohibited from attending the World Cup. And then, what is your experience once you apply for a visa to the US? Tourist visa applicants must now disclose social media account details. This has led to denials of entries for ordinary travelers, international students, and people seeking to go to business conferences. For transgender people, including athletes, US visa rules now require you to declare and enter the US with your sex assigned at birth. This directly contravenes FIFA's non-discrimination policies. German teenagers on a post-graduation trip were detained and strip-searched in Hawaii. A French scientist was denied entry for expressing opinions about Trump administration policies in private messages. How many fans will not risk thousands of dollars to be humiliated and possibly denied entry? Now I'm going to turn to some of, not all, of the World Cup risk for residents and people inside the US. This summer, FIFA canceled, without warning or explanation, its own planned anti-racism and anti-discrimination messaging at Club World Cup venues. Predictable discrimination incidents resulted. On July 2, homophobic chants were reported at the FIFA Club World Cup match at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Fans, this is a quote from Bailey Brown, fans universally condemned the FIFA move, which was seen as pandering to Trump administration anti-DEI policies. In another area of concern, FIFA has so far not put in place a child safeguarding policy for the 2026 World Cup. This is a great report I recommend by the Center for Sport and Human Rights. Risks that children can face include trafficking, sexual exploitation, child labor, and family displacements. Event organizers need to put in place mandatory safeguarding training, binding child protection standards, designated safeguarding officers at each venue and host city, and set up and implement a centralized grievance and reporting system. So deportation risks. These are some recent Human Rights Watch reports. In his closing statement for the Club World Cup, FIFA President Gianni Infantino claimed there were, quote, no incidents. Not true. There were ultimately 145 human rights and other complaints filed with FIFA at the Club World Cup, including at least one immigration action that we know of. Since taking office in January, the Trump administration has wrongfully deported asylum seekers and legal U.S. residents to El Salvador, Panama, Costa Rica, and Rwanda. A team of Human Rights Watch researchers interviewed 48 of 299 nationals expelled from just one of those countries, to Panama. They intended to seek asylum in the U.S., and many had gone to great extents to communicate their fear of return. Mina, a 27-year-old woman from Iran, said, "I asked for asylum repeatedly. I really tried. Nobody listened to me." This week, three-time Grammy Award-winning singer Bad Bunny was announced as the halftime entertainment for the Super Bowl. He has refused to tour in the U.S. due to risk for his fans to be detained and deported. In response, Trump Homeland Security official Corey Lewandowski warned that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, that's an acronym you need to get to know, ICE agents will be present to conduct arrests at the Super Bowl. Here's a quote, "We will find you and apprehend you and put you in a detention facility and deport you. Know that this is a very real situation under this administration." These aren't hypothetical scenarios for a supposedly fun family event. Last summer, during the Club World Cup, U.S. Customs and Border Protection posted on social media, "Let the games begin. CBP will be suited and booted and ready to provide security." At a World Cup countdown boat party, reporters from Telemundo, a leading Spanish news outlet and an official broadcaster, were stopped by DHS and the Coast Guard. Their party was canceled after guests were ordered to show documentation of their legal status. In major U.S. urban areas, Trump has sent U.S. military forces to respond to protests, risking a previously unthinkable martial law environment for the World Cup. In June, Los Angeles became ground zero for the clash between welcoming global event and immigration roundups. As the World Cup tournament, Club World Cup tournament unfolded, thousands of federal agents roamed the streets of Southern California, seizing people from their workplaces and markets. Immigrants in the U.S. now fear going to work, church, school, or simply stepping outside. This environment is not compatible with hosting a fun and successful World Cup. So Human Rights Watch has written directly to FIFA to ask what actions and remedy FIFA is planning for players, journalists, and others who are subject to discrimination and wrongful interrogation or arbitrary arrest while in the U.S. I also wanted to tell you about the Dignity 2026 Coalition. This is U.S.-based human rights, labor, and civil rights groups. It's called Dignity 2026, and we are constantly calling out risks. Now for the what you can do. For FIFA, it has both the responsibility and the leverage to address this crisis. The World Cup is projected to generate $4.7 billion in economic output for the host country. That's significant leverage. FIFA needs to press the Trump administration to roll back its pernicious visa policies and practices that threaten migrants and foreign visitors. What you can do for players, fans, journalists, and others. National football federations need to start speaking out now, both to the U.S. government and to FIFA. World Cup teams contain many immigrants. These players do not want to be part of an event where fans and families in a fan zone or parking lot are forever separated from their loved ones. For journalists and academics, you shouldn't have the contents of your phone downloaded to the U.S. government just because you are planning to come on a work trip to cover the World Cup in the United States. Journalists shouldn't be deported because of their reporting. That has just happened in Atlanta. We have 8 months until the opening ceremony of the World Cup. This is enough time to turn the tide and make this World Cup one that is not a human rights crisis zone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minky. Next to speak comes from Egypt via Vancouver, I think. Researcher and investigative journalist with Politica and Play the Game. And the intriguing title of his talk is All the President's Men, but something tells me it's not going to be about the late and lamented Robert Redford. Karim Zidan, please come to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want you to take a moment to picture something with me. It's a humid summer night in Washington, D.C. You're standing on the manicured south lawn of the White House, home to the President of the United States and a living museum of American history, where presidents once welcomed heads of state and even held the annual Easter egg hunt. A steel cage now stands, its black mesh and bloodied canvas contrasting against the white columns of the executive mansion. Floodlights wash the lawn in artificial glow, and a lit arch frames the Washington Monument like a silent specter beyond the cage. 5,000 hand-picked guests crowd close while massive screens project every punch and kick to tens of thousands more gathered outside the gates. Fireworks crackle overhead as the country celebrates its 250th anniversary with a mixed martial arts event. As bizarre as this may sound, and trust me, it is bizarre, this is precisely the setting for the planned Ultimate Fighting Championship show at the White House next year, an event I believe is the culmination of Donald Trump's fusion of sports, politics, and spectacle. This picture behind me was unveiled last month by Dana White, the UFC's brash and foul-mouthed CEO, who also happens to be one of Donald Trump's closest allies. He repeatedly endorsed Trump and even produced a propaganda documentary on Trump entitled Combatant in Chief. And when Trump won the 2024 presidential election, it was White who took the stage at his victory party, because naturally, Trump needed his favorite fight promoter to seal the deal. Make no mistake about it, the UFC helped put Trump back in the White House. Trump frequently attended UFC events, basking in the admiration of the young, predominantly male crowd. He cultivated relationships with fighters, leveraging their support to portray himself as a symbolic strongman. And now, he's leveraging the UFC to stage arguably the biggest example of sports propaganda in American history. Trump's unique relationship with the UFC is a topic I've been reporting on extensively for the past decade, and is a major theme of my upcoming debut book. It also served as the inspiration for an in-depth project with Play the Game that maps Trump's relationships to sports and the sprawling cast of athletes, sports executives, media influencers, and politicians who helped bring his sports spectacles to life. While Trump has long used sports as a stage to launder his reputation, promote his brand, and propagate his political ideology, his efforts have never been a solo act. This project really highlights the most prominent sports figures in Trump's orbit, detailing their ties to him, the roles they have played in advancing his agenda, and the personal or political gains they have sought in return. While I will not be able to walk you through the entire cast of characters due to the limited time, I think Philippe might kill me if I do that, I wanted to focus on some of the key figures from the UFC, as they form the most recognizable and influential figures in Trump's orbit. Some of the most influential, that is. This is Ari Emanuel, CEO of Endeavor and one of the most influential figures in entertainment and media. Beyond Hollywood, he owns both the UFC and World Wrestling Entertainment, the WWE, two cultural powerhouses with massive, loyal audiences. Emanuel also has a long-standing personal connection with Donald Trump, having served as his agent during his time on the reality show The Apprentice. Despite being a registered Democrat and the brother of Rahm Emanuel, who was Barack Obama's former chief of staff, Ari Emanuel continued to maintain a really friendly rapport with Trump that endured well into the political arena. Under Emmanuel's leadership, the UFC and WWE have experienced a noticeable rightward shift, increasingly amplifying pro-Trump messaging and cultural narratives. Emmanuel, in turn, has leveraged that relationship for access, influence, and deal-making, positioning himself at the intersection of politics, entertainment, and power. The next two characters are going to be even more recognizable, starting with this man right here, Conor McGregor. The controversial former UFC champion made headlines when he visited the White House on St. Patrick's Day this year, invited by Trump in place of the Irish Prime Minister. Though McGregor hadn't fought in several years, he has stayed in the spotlight through a string of controversies, including being found liable for sexual assault, and in November 2024, he's also been a figure embraced by the Irish far right, using his platform to sow division. His White House appearance really seemed to be an effort to legitimize his standing among conservatives and to boost his ambitions for a potential Irish presidential bid. Though, spoiler, he never actually made it onto the ballot. For Trump, meeting McGregor was a strategic move. McGregor's notoriety and outspoken persona helps reinforce the anti-establishment and nationalist themes that Trump loves to project, appealing directly to far-right and populist audiences internationally. By aligning with a figure like McGregor, Trump signals his willingness to embrace controversial personalities who resonate with certain voter bases, amplifying his influence beyond the US while tapping into that global conservative networks. And then there is Joe Rogan. The occasional UFC commentator turned media powerhouse through the Joe Rogan Experience, one of the most watched podcasts in the world. Once openly critical of Trump, Rogan flipped the script in October 2024, hosting the former president, or the current president now, for a 3-hour marathon conversation that racked up over 50 million views on YouTube alone. He later publicly endorsed Trump alongside Elon Musk, attended the inauguration, and has become a central figure in the MAGA media universe. Rogan's true power, though, lies in his reach and cultural credibility. His predominantly male, culturally savvy audience is primed for his anti-establishment countercultural messaging, making them highly receptive to Trump's rhetoric. By amplifying Trump through his podcast, Rogan didn't just shape the conversation. He helped shift perceptions, energize voters, and influence the outcome of the 2024 election, cementing his role as a kingmaker in modern American politics. Now, of course, Trump's soft power extends beyond the UFC. Next year, the US is going to co-host the 2024 FIFA World Cup, an event that would not be possible without the help and support of this man, Gianni Infantino. Now, elected shortly before Trump took office in 2017, Infantino developed a friendship with Trump as the latter sought to secure the hosting rights for the 2026 World Cup. The relationship deepened during Trump's second term, with Infantino even attending Trump's inauguration and appearing alongside him in the Oval Office. And finally, there's Casey Wasserman, the president of the organizing committee of the 2028 Los Angeles Olympic Games, and the CEO of a major sports marketing and talent management agency. While traditionally aligned with Democratic politics, Wasserman has maintained pragmatic ties with Trump's circle to protect and advance major sports initiatives, including securing political and logistical support for the Olympic Games. Dear colleagues, these are just a handful of the characters I have profiled in this new series for Play the Game. While my talk focused mainly on the UFC, there are dozens of other figures from this wide range of other sports who help put sports at the center of Trump's political agenda. It cannot be overstated that no previous US president has embedded himself so deeply in the nation's sporting life, especially to consolidate power, amplify culture war narratives, and erode democratic norms. By transforming sports into a platform for his authoritarian-leaning MAGA agenda, Trump is not only reshaping the role of sports in American life, but also the broader fabric of American society and politics overall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim. And I think you actually didn't use your whole 10 minutes, if you can believe it. Now, representatives and officials from official sports bodies are usually reluctant I use that word, to come to play the game and to speak and play the game, which is understandable, I must say, because it is their work which is at the heart of most of our discussions, and these discussions are very often difficult ones. So it gives me all the more pleasure to call to the stage Hans Natorp, President of the National Olympic Committee and Sports Confederation of Denmark.
Thank you, Philip. Yes, this is indeed a tough stage to present a National Olympic Committee, or even bigger, the Olympic movement. But let me try. I'll do my best. In a polarized world, sport remains one of the few, if not the only, arena where nations meet in peaceful coexistence. Yes, I know we can argue that, but this is what we try to protect. Rivals share the track, flags fly side by side, and even those who disagree on most matters, they can agree on the finish line. One of the greatest highlights of any Olympic Games for me is walking through the Olympic Village. The village becomes a living reminder of our shared aspiration for peaceful coexistence, a microcosmos of Olympic spirit. And as sport leaders, it is our responsibility, my responsibility, to protect sport as a unique meeting place. I will outline 3 principles that guide the Danish Olympic Committee, the boundaries we uphold, and how we address challenges calmly, consistently, and equally for every host. These standards apply to upcoming events in the United States, as they do everywhere. First, partnership is welcome, politicization is not. Major events depend on public authorities for security, transport, infrastructure, and funding. It is both normal and legitimate for governments and heads of state to be involved. However, the stage belongs to the athletes and the competition. When an event becomes a platform for political messaging, everyone loses. Athletes, fans, hosts, and the sport. Drawing on the work of Danish Professor Hans Bonde from the University of Copenhagen, who has analyzed the political dimensions of mega events, we distinguish in the Danish NOC between 3 kinds of politicization. Legitimate involvement, politicization. Every host enjoys a legitimate political monopoly, the right to use opening and closing ceremonies, symbols, architecture, the VIP tribune, to present a positive national narrative. This is expected and normal, as governments always play a role through funding, infrastructure, and security. Politicization can turn into over-politicization. This occurs when the monopoly is overstretched, such as when Qatar turned the World Cup medal ceremony into a branding exercise, or when Russia used sport as a nationalist war propaganda tool. In these cases, sports credibility is directly undermined. Our reaction, the sports reaction, will be counter-politicization. This is when sport itself responds, for example, by suspending Russia and Belarus or sanctioning discriminatory behavior. It is how sport should defend its integrity when over-politicization occurs. Our responsibility is to distinguish legitimate involvement from over-politicization and uphold that distinction consistently. I regularly discuss these dilemmas with Professor Bonde and other scholars. Their research and critique challenge us, challenge me, and help to refine our approach. This dialogue between practice and research is invaluable. It sharpens our vocabulary, strengthens our discipline, and ultimately enhances our ability to protect sports integrity. So, secondly, rules decide, not politics. Trust in sport arises when results are determined by performance, not by external pressure. Autonomy is not an abstract concept. It is the daily reality that qualifications, eligibility, and competitions decisions are made through made according to an agreed rule book, not in response to political agendas. When rules decide, belief in sports endures. And third, impartial on the field, respectful off the field. On the field of play, competition must remain impartial. That is non-negotiable. Off the field, athletes are citizens like the rest of us. There must be dignified, predictable ways to express values and opinions without turning the arena into a political forum. This balance, impartial performance and respectful voice, protects both excellence and dignity, as described in the Olympic Charter, Rule 50, regarding political expressions. These are our principles, and here is our stance. As stated at the outset, we apply the same standards to every host nation. The field of play is for sport, not for commentary on governments or politics. We are consistent because consistency is the foundation of trust. Regardless of venue, our expectations remain the same. An event that keeps politics at arm's length, honors athletes, and operates by the rules. We are also realists. Politics will always surround major events. Public money and attention are involved, and heads of state take an interest. US President Trump's engagement with major events is not unusual. It reflects what we see from leaders in all host nations. We neither dramatize nor deny it. Our role is simply to ensure that politics does not dominate the event. Yes, and I did listen. We judge partners by our experience. Our interactions with the LA 28 organizers have been professional, constructive, and solution-oriented. This is what we seek in any relation with any organizing committee: clarity, competence, and calmness. And how do we act as a relatively small NOC? Through dialogue and discipline. Sport is practical. Most issues are resolved by early and clear communication, what is expected of teams and officials, and how to maintain focus on competition. When concerns arise, we address them directly and professionally. We remain consistent in conflicts. Crises will occur, sometimes overnight. Our compass does not shift with the headlines. While it is natural to feel most affected by conflicts close to us, we cannot allow proximity to dictate our principles. We coordinate with national authorities on security and access, and we consider foreign policy positions. Yet our decisions in sport are independent. They follow the Olympic Charter and the IF rulebook, not party politics. Our focus is on athletes' safety, fair participation, and event integrity. People often ask, where's the line? I use three simple markers. When ceremonies or team moments become political showcases beyond the host's legitimate monopoly, the line is crossed. When political pressure influences qualifications, eligibility, or rule enforcement, the line is crossed. When rules on expression are so vague that conflict spills onto the field of play, the line is crossed. And even worse, when athletes face protests that threaten their safety, as seen at the recent Vuelta a España, it becomes a direct threat to both safety and competition integrity. If these markers appear, our response is simple: address the issue promptly and maintain perspective. Facts first, escalation last. This is how we, from a Danish context, maintain public trust. We must also remember Denmark's global context. Denmark represents just 0.47% of IOC member countries and 0.07% of their total population. We can influence, but not decide alone. Our strength lies in alliances, credibility, and consistency, not in dictating outcomes or boycotting when we disagree. These principles are embedded in the Danish NOC's international strategy. This strategy reflects the same compass described here, and it commits us to defend autonomy through responsibility and good governance. It drives us to collaborate with human rights institutions and civil society on practical tools, from safeguarding to due diligence. Alliances are our main lever of influence, first in the Nordics, then in Europe and globally. We know Denmark cannot dictate outcomes, but with credibility, consistency, and coalitions, we can set standards and move the line forward. For us, is that what strategy means in practice? The strength of sport lies not in grand gestures, but in steady, principled, applied consistency. The world needs a space where people meet across borders and beliefs. Sport is that space. If major events become arenas for political point scoring, we lose more than medals. We lose one of the last shared spaces that gathers people from all over the world, and that matters far beyond the scoreboard. So, my message is clear. Protect sport as our global meeting space. Welcome partnerships, but resist politicization. Let rules decide. Keep the field of play impartial. Off-field space respectful, judge partners by their conduct, not by the surrounding noise. Above all, apply the same standards to every host, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans. And the last of our 5 speakers at this session is a very well-known figure at Play the Game, and dare I say, in quite a few other places. It's James M. Dorsey from Singapore, who is the Adjunct Senior Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, and is also the author of a very popular Substack called The Turbulent World with James Dorsey. And the very James, I have to say, title of this presentation is "It's Politics, Stupid?" James, up to you.
Thank you, Philippe, and I want to say thank you to the organizers, who once again are tolerating me. There's a silver lining in being the last contributor in a panel of distinguished speakers who have eloquently said what there is to say. I would like to add some critical notes as food for thought on various aspects of our discussion. Let me start with the elephant in the room. Much of what we heard in the excellent presentations by Jules, Karim, Minky, and Hans discusses the fallout of the relationship, the incestuous relationship between sports and politics, the assault on human rights, the politicization and weaponization of sports, and the double standards that are not unique to sports, but are reflected in the policies of many international, regional, and national sports associations. What I miss in these discussions, in these legitimate and valuable discussions, is a focused approach to handling and regulating the relationship between sports and politics. Let me be clear. I don't have well-rounded solutions, but rather pointers that may help us think things through. What I do know is that unless we start thinking proactively about the relationship between sports and politics and make it a focal point of continuous discussion, we will continue to fight rearguard battles rather than tackling the underlying issues that enable some of the problems raised here. To clarify, this is not intended to put human rights groups and activists on the defensive. On the contrary, it is to stimulate discussion. Sports and politics are inseparable Siamese twins, joined at the hip. They are a fact of life and necessary, as seen, for example, in the importance of sports in public health policy and the contribution of sports to various sectors of the economy, including tourism, hospitality, entertainment, and the leisure industry. Sports are not unique in grappling with the relationship to politics. The same is true for finance, with regulators like the Security and Exchange Commission in the United States and the Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulation Authority in the United Kingdom, or the independence of central banks to safeguard monetary policies. Another example is Ofwat, the Water Services Regulation Authority in the United Kingdom, one of the few countries to have privatized water as an asset. Sports may need more than a regulator. I would argue that it requires a code of conduct that is supervised and managed by a regulator. Without a supervisory and regulatory mechanism, sports executives have a free hand under the fictional mum that sports and politics are separate. Let me digress for a moment to place all of this in a broader context that underscores the urgency of discussions on sports and politics. That larger context is that we live in a world in which the number of leaders who are not simply authoritarian or autocratic, but more importantly, think in civilizational terms, has reached critical mass. Go down the list: Trump, Putin, Netanyahu, Orban, Narendra Modi, and Xi Jinping, just to name a few. In other words, regulating the relationship between sports and politics is not just about sports. It is also about the broader implications of this relationship. This, coupled with the issue of double standards, has consequences for activists, particularly regarding the promotion of social and gender rights in the context of the culture wars being waged by civilizational leaders. This may require a more selective, targeted approach to name and shame tactics. Moreover, the standards issue underscores the importance of grassroots and educational work, in addition to investigating and documenting abuse and violations, as well as efforts to influence policies at national, regional, and international levels. Finally, allow me to address the concept of sports washing. Too often, activists position sports washing as the primary rationale of autocratic sports acquisitions and sponsorships. Reputation is undoubtedly a factor, but it is not always the primary factor. In addition, the added significance of reputational drivers is modified by the fact that, for example, Gulf states appear similar at first glance, but in reality are significantly different. Those differences are reflected in the varying drivers of their sports investment policies. The litmus test is whether countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates would invest in sports if reputational issues were not at stake. The answer is a resounding yes, which means that sports washing is at best a secondary driver. For Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, it's about his economic diversification plan and sports contribution, not only in its own right, but also in terms of public health, tourism, and entertainment. To be sure, reputation in terms of the ability to organize mega events, international standing, and nation branding are considerations, but they are not by definition sports washing, which is at best a by-effect. Moreover, if the 2018 killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi is anything to go by, it didn't take long for bin Salman to put the reputational damage behind him, aided by a world of civilizational leaders. One lesson from the Qatar World Cup is the need for grassroots work, not only in target countries, but equally crucially among fans globally. The fact of the matter is that only a minority of fans truly cares about human rights or labor rights. More important for fans in Qatar were the complexities of the Haya system and the cost of attending the World Cup. Finally, one last point, the discussion about a sports boycott of Israel. Again, let me be clear, I favor a boycott, but we need to be honest about the fact that boycotts involve one of the aspects of Israeli policy that we take Israel to task for, namely collective punishment. What that means is that to the degree possible, we have to tailor boycotts to ensure that those who stand on the right side of history or are, to whatever degree, victims of objectionable policies are exempted from punitive measures. There is no debate about Israeli West Bank settler teams or clubs like Beitar Jerusalem with racist policies. Beitar is the only Israeli club that refuses to hire Palestinian or Muslim players, or, in rare instances when they did, allowed a racist fan base to force those players' departure. There is a clear distinction in various calls for a sports boycott of Israel. In contrast to the Game Over Israel campaign, which demands a blanket boycott of Israeli football, including the National Federation, the national team, clubs, and players, United Nations experts have called exclusively for a boycott of Israel's national team. The Game Over blank boycott approach punishes Israeli-Palestinian players who frequently encounter racist attacks. It also punishes teams like Bnei Zachnin, Israel's foremost Israeli-Palestinian squad. These are challenging and sensitive issues, and there may not always be clean solutions. Even so, these are issues one has to confront head-on, rather than leaving them out unspoken. In summary, all of this is a collection of random notes intended as food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. So now we move to the debate part of this session. So all the speakers, Jules, Karim, Hans, James has stayed, Minky, are going to join us. First of all, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask, which actually are fairly wide questions, but I think most of the time which we have left in this session should be devoted to questions. And by the way, the questions can be asked to a specific member of the panel or to all of the panel. And I'll just remind you as well of the fact that please, just questions, no statements. But I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. And I have to say, I will confess, I had a slight moment of almost hilarity when I know it's nothing to do with the theme we're discussing. When I was hearing Hans, I misheard. You were talking, Hans, about the Olympic Games being a mega event, and I understood genuinely MAGA event. And so I cracked it. If you saw me crack up, that was why. But anyway, to go back to the actual subject, which I suppose MAGA event I've got something to do with, and I'm listening to very, I wouldn't say conflicting, but contrasted points of view. The one question I'm asking myself is it too late for us to embrace pragmatism as an attitude to have towards sports events when we realize that more and more of these global sports events are actually given to countries with authoritarian regimes? I don't need to remind you that 2034, the World Cup, FIFA World Cup, will be going to Saudi Arabia. And when we see a completely new situation developing in America, where a country which, at least in its own eyes, is seen as a beacon of tolerance and freedom and welcoming, is turning into something very different when a government starts to look like a regime. And we have to ask ourselves questions about, well, what should we do? What can we do? Can we do anything? So my question to all of you is it too late for pragmatism? Who would like to have a go at that? Minky, perhaps? You're looking at me.
Hi, everyone. So I want to pick up on James's idea of boycotts, and also to say Human Rights Watch as an organization doesn't favor boycotts. What we favor is actually engagement. And I think being a global organization covering more than 100 countries and also working on these major sporting events over a period of decades gives us that perspective. And, you know, for many years we've been calling we've actually been calling for engagement, not disengagement. And the engagement, for example, would mean that in the context of the Saudi World Cup, For example, that FIFA would do several basic things. That is, make sure that there's a system of life insurance, that human rights activists are allowed to access facilities, that there is a compensation fund set up to compensate the families of workers who die. So there's a lot that can be done with engagement. We've been able to point to measurable progress even in some of the worst human rights situations, which is actually why we're encouraging FIFA to engage with the United States. And we certainly, as an organization, we're headquartered in the US, and we intend to cover the United States World Cup, the Olympics, in the same way that we covered the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the Sochi Olympics in 2014, the World Cup in Russia in 2018. And these are circumstances where it is possible to use these mega sporting events to make systemic progress, but it's also possible that these events are that actually they're the source of major human rights abuses. You know, we shouldn't see thousands of workers dying preventable deaths because of the kafala system and because of not having basic human rights. So I think it's when you cover a lot of these events, you see what is possible, but then I think you also see that these events could be the sources of major human rights abuses. And in the context of the US, which is what several of us were talking about now, I think there's still time to guarantee that ICE is not arresting and separating families in parking lots, that journalists have the right and the ability to work, and that Karim in particular does not have the contents of his phone downloaded on his entry to the United States.
Well, I think Jean Cocteau, the French poet, I have to quote the French poet, of course, it's part of my remit, but he said we have to know how much we can go too far. And that was my question, is how far can we go in this idea of engagement, using events as a means to progress things? Is there actually a case in which we're actually not quite realizing where we are in the world today, and we are actually, by carrying on this dialogue, I know I'm taking the devil's advocate point of view here, but we are actually already going too far. And any of you, I mean, James, would you like to answer that question?
Well, let me answer it in this way, if I may. It's partly an answer to Minky. I'm all in favor of engagement. Let me be very clear about that. I don't see boycotts as sort of a blanket answer to anything and everything. In fact, until very recently in the war in Gaza, I was opposed to a boycott of Israel. The problem with engagement is the way to go. But the problem with engagement is, if you're engaged in a dialogue of the deaf, there's no point to it. I've been engaged to a degree, and this was not on a sports level, but on another level, in dialogue between organizations which were reaching out to the far right in various countries. And it was a policy that I encouraged and endorsed. Fact of the matter is, it was a dead-end road. Nothing came out of those. Or what came out of that, if there anything came out of it, was legitimization of the autocratic or authoritarian dialogue partner. So I think one has to also put that into mind. I'm not going to go into the reasons why, in the case of Israel, I've changed my mind, beyond to say that at this point, I think in terms of Israel, it's shock therapy. There is no dialogue, fundamentally. And there are lots of reasons for that, but that would take us much too far.
I think you wanted to say something here, Karim.
Yeah, honestly, Philippe, I think I'll answer your question a bit more directly regarding the pragmatism and stuff like that when it comes to sports. Personally, I think until we choose to stop romanticizing sports and what sports are, we will continue to fall into the same pitfall where we believe events can be the harbingers of peace. They most certainly are not. The World Cup will not bring peace. The Olympic Games will not bring peace. They will bring misery. They will bring economic disparity. That's actually what these things do. Sure, they bring you joy for a while. How many games do you actually remember? from the Qatar World Cup. I bet you remember parts of the final, sure, but you remember more than that? I mean, I think we've overextended here in terms of how we view sports in general. And I mean, listen, sports do wonderful things on an individual level, and even on a community level and grassroots abilities. But once we take it to the national level and we start empowering both the IOC and FIFA and these sports executives to strengthen their own position by saying, hey, our sports can actually bring peace, we're going down a very, very bad path. And this is something Trump is jumping on right now. And it's part of why I chose to do this profiling of these different individuals, because these people also help normalize what he is doing. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, this continued normalization of these types of events, no matter where they're held, and the romanticization of the idea that sports is going to save us in the end. It's all complete nonsense.
Yes. I think Jules wanted to have a word. Hans, Jules, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say, interesting question via French poetry about whether it's possible to go too far. I like it. I wonder if there's a lot of people in the room that felt like the International Olympic Committee went too far when they banned South Africa between 1964 and 1992. I somehow doubt it. They wouldn't even allow the great Caster Semenya to take the racetrack. I would say I'll counter your French poetry with some US-American poetry, which is there's a poet from New York City who said there are a lot of things that, don't matter, line break, and they add up. And so if you think that like the boycott of South Africa via sport didn't matter, it was part of something really big that definitely added up. And so I do think that we can do a lot right now, and I second the idea around really questioning Israel. I wrote an essay for The Guardian last week that took the work of a lot of human rights groups and I set it up next to FIFA statutes, and I said, based on FIFA's own statutes and regulations, yeah, Israel should probably not be participating in these upcoming qualifier events. So I think that Hans really stressed the idea of consistency is the basis of trust. And so let's just consistently apply these principles to Israel and everyone else. And I'd actually be really interested to know, not to put you on the spot, but yeah, to put you on the spot. I mean, Israel participated in the recent Olympics in Paris. There were two reasons that the Russians didn't. One was that they broke the Olympic truce, while Israel during the Olympics broke the Olympic truce plenty. The second was that they had taken over territory in Ukraine and then taken over the sports clubs there and ran them. Well, we just heard about the West Bank. So I'm interested in hearing, like, would that be going too far for somebody in a position of power inside the Olympic circle?
Is it something you would be happy to respond to?
Sure. Well, I often hear this narrative that sport is a peace project. It's not. If we do sport well, we might, if we are lucky, create a more peaceful environment around us. And I'm not talking about global peace, I'm just talking about making things better. And in that perspective, it's very, very important to have engagement. So what we do here is very important. And I think personally we cannot go too far on that. But from a National Olympic Committee perspective, we also embrace and we actually protect the most valuable asset we think we have. That we are the only global cultural common denominator where we meet everybody, the same place, the same time, around sport. And that means we will have authoritarian regimes, countries we don't like, as hosts. Otherwise, it's not a global project any longer, and we will not meet everybody. This is also why we try to protect the very narrow context of sport, saying we keep the field of play non-political and the arena. But we are not naive. We know everything that goes in the surroundings. And we were presented here what is going on in the US. Engagement is so important. So what happened to Russia, Belarus, and Israel? Yes, you are right about the facts they are sanctioned on. But I think it's deeper than that. Remember, when this is the only global cultural common denominator. When we sanction a nation, this is, in Danish we would say, this is the exemption that underlines the rule. everybody is there. You really have to go far to get this sanction. And Russia did go far. They utilized Olympic Games 3 times for war, 2008, 14. Even they had the state-sponsored doping scandal. They were cheating on the athletes. And then we had 2022. So from a sport community perspective, at least where I see it, we had in common that feeling enough is enough. Now you stay out. For the moment, we cannot say that for any other country. And this is not a very fixed threshold. It's always on debate. South Africa and the sanction against South Africa back in the 80s, yes, but that was carried on the back of international sanctions, not only in sport. And that's also important. Russia actually has part of the same here. And that brings me to the final point here. We must be very careful to utilize sport as something that can lever an agenda where the rest of the world is not following up. So if I go home and tell my sporting community in Denmark that now you cannot go to the World Cup in Qatar, but you can still go on holidays, and we still have trade, and we still have diplomacy going on, no, this will not work. Won't bring us anywhere. So this is the logic. This is the narrative we work within, looking at it from a national Olympic committee in Denmark.
I mean, if I can just bounce back, just coming to you, Minky, in a second, but when you meet with representatives from other national committees, is it something that you discuss between yourselves? Like, for example, what's happening with America and, you know, the Los Angeles Games coming? Is it a subject of conversation that is coming on the table quite naturally and quite a lot?
Sometimes, not always. But, well, we ended up having athletes from Russia and Belarus as neutral individual athletes at the Paris Games. I think that wouldn't have happened if we didn't raise a voice from as we did from the Nordics and other parts of the world. So of course we discuss it. But again, if we go to sanctions, it is the exemption that underlines the rule. And I also want to stress the difference between sanctions and boycott, because in my vocabulary, boycott is when we as a nation will step back. But then I would actually go directly from politicization to counter-politicization and back again. So I would actually be the one who is politicizing sport. And this is actually what I try to keep at arm's length. So that will not happen.
And just an observation, how sports has changed also. I think we have to admit that the size and the cost of these events is rising. Remember when the 2008 Beijing Olympics was happening, it was $52 billion, and everyone said, that's it, there'll never be a more expensive major sporting event. And just a few years later, we have the Qatar World Cup. You know, who knows what the true number was, but $220 billion. Billion has never been disputed. And I think we're looking ahead to the Saudi World Cup, where stadiums are being built in the desert, places like Neom, where cities don't even exist yet, and where migrant workers don't have access, consular access, if their rights are violated. So I think one big problem that we have to deal with is the size and the cost of these events. I think also the thing we could, if we're looking for where we can all agree, I think it has to be baseline human rights conditions, and that's actually made easier by one of the big changes, and that is both the IOC and FIFA and most sports federations have adopted the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and that means they have a responsibility to do human rights due diligence and to implement their own policies. And I think if we can agree that baseline working conditions for athletes will be not being interrogated on your entry to the country about your gender, or because a US customs official doesn't like the way you look, or that journalists not be harassed because of something they've written in the past, or that migrant workers don't die by the tens of thousands. I mean, I think those are reasonable baselines for sports organizations and federations to draw. Those are lines that they can and they're going to have to draw.
Right, I'm looking at my watch and I'm thinking that it's probably time that we went to the room, to the floor, and you can ask your questions. We've got volunteers in the room with microphones. So if you have questions, I'm sure you've got plenty of questions, and again, you can ask a question to one of our panelists or the panel as a whole. I remind you that the topic, or the original topic of this session was the upcoming battles between sports and politics on US soil. But obviously, when you talk about the US soil, what's happening with the US, you're talking about the world in general as well. So any questions in the room, please? Hands up, please. Oh, quite a few. We have one, we've got a couple here. Gentleman in the middle, if you can rise. I'm putting, oh. Okay. Whoever rose first has got the microphone. So please identify yourself and then ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Johannes Støman, and I'm a student from Norway. My question is mainly directed towards Jules. We're observing the United States as arguably at the point this time as a democracy in decline with some authoritarian impulses and tendencies. So I was wondering regarding what James mentioned about sports washing and deflecting from less than favorable aspects of authoritarian regimes being mainly a secondary effect, a motivation behind authoritarian regimes wanting to host sports mega events. Is there a distinction between the US and how they view hosting of sports mega events and authoritarian regimes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, I mean, I get to flex my political science muscles for a second, because I think the United States, according to most political scientists, is now what we call the new competitive authoritarianism, verging toward it, if not already there. There's a little bit of a discrepancy among political scientists, meaning there are the trappings of democracy, as in elections, but also teamed up with what are clearly autocratic methods that we were hearing about today. So I guess I think that there's a lot that can be done directly about this situation, including taking the protective measures that Minky has described. I think also just getting the word out. In terms of the question around sports washing and the deflecting attention and also political advancement, I don't necessarily see those as clashing. I think that with you don't need to create a false binary, I guess is what I'm saying here. There can be some deflecting attention from authoritarian, like what people probably wouldn't dispute as authoritarian countries. Same dynamics happening in the United States. There's also, I think, what James was alluding to around the sort of use of surplus capital that certain countries have built up through, Saudi Arabia is a good example, through oil money that needs to be spread out, helps diversify the economy. Similar dynamics are at work. I guess what I'm trying to say is, whereas before a lot of times it was just like sports washing was this thing you waggled your finger at other countries that you just didn't like or that had authoritarian tendencies, that these same dynamics that we so disparage, rightly so, in these other countries, we're getting a free pass in places like the United States and elsewhere. And I think it's just really important to take off those ideological horse blinders so we can see everything with quite a bit more clarity and accuracy.
Other questions? We've got one here. Third row, please. Can you stand as well? So thank you very much.
Hello, I'm back. So in Australia, we have a sports diplomacy policy. I think we're the only country in the world that has this, although America, prior to the second Trump administration, had a very robust sports diplomacy program. I consider that sports washing, just a slightly different version. What are your thoughts on countries like Australia, the United States in the past, Canada, that do sport for development programs? Is there a difference between going out, spreading the seed of Australian sport across the Pacific and Asia, and the difference between some of the things that you've talked about today? Is the intention the most important thing, or the outcome?
Who'd like to take this question on? Come on, one of you can do it. Minky has lifted her finger, so Minky gets the right to answer.
Thank you, Nikki. I think, I've seen the sports diplomacy system really work in a lot of places, and I want to talk about women and girls. And, for the 2008 Beijing Olympics, 3 countries sent all male teams, and in practice it was against the law until 2018 for women and girls in Saudi Arabia and many other countries even to go to stadiums. So I think sports diplomacy has actually helped raise the bar for this, and women athletes around the world have contributed to supporting other women athletes. I think it's largely not been so much a state effort as a solidarity effort that has been really important in making access to education. Think about it, if you're not able to play sport as a woman, you don't have access to scholarships. You can't get a business degree and open a sports company. Entire sectors are closed to you. So I think that's one of, I would say, in Saudi Arabia, that is one of the big changes. For example, access that women and girls have to sport. It's still dependent on whether your male guardian lets you actually play sports or participate or go somewhere. But I think the sports diplomacy efforts, particularly if they're led by athletes, have been largely successful. I would also look, for example, at the union movement. I think we have some world players, leaders here. Unions, the access, equal pay, for example. The WNBA in the United States is fighting for equal pay. It's fighting for decent pay relative to their male peers in the NBA. There are a lot of lessons from Australia and the PFA, the Professional Footballers Associations, the equalization of pay for men and women. So I think there's a lot to learn from sports diplomacy, but mostly it's athletes, unions, and others in the lead.
Philip?
Yes,
Just
please.
A small comment. We learned a lot on sports diplomacy from Australia, so say thank you to the guys back home. If there's no intention, there's for sure no outcome. And just to give you a small example on that, in Denmark we are running a project with the Human Rights Institute for Human Rights, on due diligence on human rights on mega sports events, something like that. And it's driven by the Danish NOC alongside quite a few, all the Nordic NOCs and some of the North Europeans, and IOC signed a MOU on that one also. What will the outcome be? I don't know. I hope we will take small steps towards some tools we can actually use, but we're trying.
James?
Yeah, no, just one comment. Sports diplomacy comes in very many different ways. It's sometimes institutionalized. Australia is not the only country that has a sports ambassador, a foreign ministry diplomat. South Korea does. The real question is what the purpose of the exercise is. So just to give you another example of sports diplomacy, and you can make your own decision what you think of it, go back roughly 20 years to the US invasion of Afghanistan. Part of the competition between Iran and the United States on the ground in Afghanistan was building sports facilities, was encouraging sports teams. Depending on what you think of Iran, or depending on what you think of the United States, is probably going to shape your opinion of whether this was good sports diplomacy or not. The point being, it comes in all kinds of shapes and forms, and the real question is not sports diplomacy as a generic category, but what you're doing with it.
Thank you, James. There were quite a few hands raised, so okay. Lady, I'm sorry if I'm not seeing you at the back of the room. It's because I'm blinded by those spotlights. Yes, here and about seventh row, please. Go down. This way. Oh, all right. Somebody has decided to take power. This is what authoritarianism looks like, actually.
Thank you. My name is Curvinger, head of the University of the West Indies Global Campus Academy of Sport. This is for the panel, predicated on two facts. One, sport being a microcosm of society, and two, the indisputable fact that sport and politics are intertwined, would you not say that this occurrence is as a result of the socio-political, socio-economic, and other demographic issues that we see playing out internationally, manifesting in sport? And two, that this is just a continuation of historical use of sport as a tool for distraction? Thank you.
Well, do we have a question somewhere? Here, if you can go down. On the left-hand side for me, please. Here, the lady in the white top. You can pass the mic on, please.
Thank you. I finally get the mic. It's to the panel, and my question is it possible to file a formal legal complaint against the IOC and against the FIFA for allowing a country that officially violated the fundamental Olympic principles and FIFA status to host a World Cup and Olympics? Is the Court of Arbitration for Sport has the capacity for such a complaint? And I'm referencing to the FIFA zero tolerance policy, which incorporated into FIFA disciplinary code. And I'm referencing to IOC fundamental principle of Olympism, which any form of discrimination, including place of birth, sexual orientation, nationality, is absolutely not acceptable.
Would like to take this on? Minky again.
Yeah, I wanted to address the question in the back also, or the statement in the back, and answer that. I think just on the question of the economics and societal role, I think some of you may have seen that there have been protests in Morocco over the last week, escalating protests about poverty, inequality, women dying preventable deaths in hospitals at the same time stadiums are being built. And the reason that we do human rights due diligence is if you've done a good job doing your human rights assessment, then you're going to pick up that maybe no one's telling the king that women are dying in hospitals. And then the next thing you know, you have people in the streets. So I think the importance of doing human rights due diligence is this. What you're talking about also is remedy. And right now, in sport, there are no meaningful remedy systems. So if you're the victim of a human rights abuse, if your family member dies on infrastructure construction, you actually don't have a, even though FIFA has a report, the leadership has a report they commissioned saying that the families of workers who died building the Qatar World Cup are entitled to compensation, those families have not been paid compensation by FIFA or by Qatar. So I think the real problem that you're talking about is the complaint systems aren't meaningful or they don't exist. And then even if you complain, there is no remedy. And you may be retaliated against if you're an athlete. So those are the structural problems that any good human rights due diligence system would address.
Thank you. Any other questions? You've got one just here to your left. You can please pass this on.
Hi, Nick McGeehan from Fair Square. Given the US's given the US's decline into authoritarianism, and given FIFA's very close relationship with the US administration, in advance of the 2026 World Cup, what calls should US civil society be making, and to whom?
Seems like your wheelhouse.
Jules?
Well, I would say that Minky's probably the perfect person because it's actually your work. But so I'd actually defer to you. Honestly, this is exactly what you do for a living. So.
Sorry, I don't want to answer all I don't want to be the only one answering questions, but I think civil society is already making a number of calls, and one is that the immigration, for example, around the world, there are general calls for human rights reforms in the United States, and that the legal system is not capable of addressing in a fast way. But I think the calls are that FIFA use the leverage it has with the White House in 3 major areas. One is immigration, so both the rules that affect those who come to the United States. These visa bans are not justifiable under international human rights law, and for those who are inside the US, that these events should not be epicenters of human rights abuses. And I think what we saw with the Club World Cup, which was actually in 11 US cities, is a warning for the actual World Cup. But civil society is uniting around things like making sure that that everyone who is in the United States and everyone who would come to the United States is not negatively affected by the World Cup, and that would in turn head off some of the worst impulses of this administration. Just to give the example of the visa ban, when it was originally announced, it was going to be 43 countries, and in the end, I think it was a dozen countries. So there is some leverage there. FIFA has the right to say that ICE doesn't belong in its stadiums, arresting people and separating families who are coming to enjoy an event. This has already happened. So I think there's a lot that could be done in the context of the World Cup or in the context of the Olympics, but the main thing is returning to human rights core principles.
I just would add one thing real quick to that, is just that as the United States slides into the new competitive authoritarianism, now is the time to talk about it, like right now, because it's not going to get better and easier under the system. We've already seen a rapid deterioration in the United States. So if you're not going to speak out in the ways that Minky's talking about, or that other human rights groups like Fair Square are talking about, when are you actually going to do it? That's my question.
Karim?
Honestly, I just want to add just a small caveat here. I agree with everything you were both saying, but maybe the cynic in me thinks at the same time, maybe we're asking the wrong questions here in that, okay, we can file cases and sure we can take action, but who is listening? FIFA certainly has shown it doesn't care about any of the criticism. It's gone out of its way to break its own code, its own codes to protect Trump, to enable Trump. What gives us the impression that they will do anything to oppose that using the same mechanisms we've been using all this time? It just hasn't been the case. As for civil society, as much as there has been movement, it is not the movement that 2016 was when Trump was first elected. If anything, what I'm noticing is much more fatigue and a polarization that did not exist to the same level then. That has limited our ability to unify, to actually agree on what we are opposing here to begin with. Until we address those things, there is no chance for proper rebellion anyway. And taking the standard tactics that we used before is like, at this point, taking a knife to a gunfight. They're not going to respond with a lawsuit. They're not going to give a damn what Cass says, as far as I'm concerned. So why are we still using this approach when we know what the response is going to be?
Do I see a raised hand? Yes, I do see. Just in front of you there. Oh, who was first? Here. Hello. Just here, please.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Kennedy from the Eyewitness Project. Minky, I know you touched on this already when you talked about the visa ban, but we've been talking a lot about boycotts and about having some kind of consistency over how you issue boycotts and exclusion. But there are actually, there are 12 countries, 19 countries in total now, including all the partial bans that the US has had a total or partial visa ban on. Afghanistan, Myanmar, Chad, Republic of Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Yemen, Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela. And also obviously the country doesn't recognize Palestinian IDs, even if you were somehow magically able to travel for the Olympics. So by allowing the Olympics to go ahead in LA, is the Olympic Committee not just boycotting by proxy 20 countries that have done absolutely nothing wrong?
Well, I guess that was for me.
I'm afraid so.
Well, I have to lean into my conversation and the dialogue we have with the USOPC, the American Olympic Paralympic Committee. And I have a letter dated by the USOPC president from June 9th, where he's addressing this and also ensuring that every country will have access. So this is where we are, and I know it's yet to be proven. But again, I have to go back to this narrative, this context of what we do, having not MAGA events, but mega events, in close to every country in the world. And being better in dealing with human rights, due diligence and stuff like that. But the basic principle, everybody meets. So it's yet to be seen what will happen. But of course, it's worrying. It's not easy. No.
We have time for one more question. Over there, over there. Hey! The microphone is coming.
Wow, thank you. Richard Norman from Curling Canada, and apologize to all the athletes right now, but are we experiencing the end of mega events? And if not, how would you transform mega events to achieve the goals that you have been talking about?
Wow. Who would like to take that?
I'll take a crack at it real quick. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, no, we're not seeing the end of mega events because of the unaccountable groups that run them don't have a great interest in changing them. But if they did, I would say that there'd be a few things that we could do. One is to institute baseline human rights principles in the way that Minky described. Two, in a moment of rising authoritarianism in the United States around the world, institute democracy at every single turn that's possible. Sport can lead the way in that sense. And third, I would say, give athletes more power and say over the sports mega events. And let me just say, no offense, like, not all athletes are created equal on this front, meaning I want critical-minded athletes that are willing to grapple with the kind of questions that are asked at Play the Game. There are plenty of high-level compliant athletes that will pretty much just go along with whatever's said. I'd be more interested in seeing Nikki Dryden, for example. I'd be more interested in seeing Caster Semenya, for example, on the IOC if they were to do themselves that duty. So those are the three things I guess I would say really quickly in response.
Yeah. I also wanted to say, you know, there are the baseline things that we can agree. I've tried to cover them in the remarks, and thanks for reading out the list of banned countries. I actually had a list to read out, but I was restricted by time. And I think, you know, no militarization of these events, right? That's what we could be looking at martial law, which I don't think anyone thinks is good for athletes or good for Olympics. It creates real security and safeguarding risks, workers' rights, players' rights. I think it's up to athletes to decide if they want to engage or not. And often, as we've discussed, athletes who do engage or have an opinion or voice an opinion are retaliated against. I'm thinking of Manisha Talahi, the Afghan woman athlete who had free Afghan women, the breakdancer who spoke to the plight of 20 million women in her country at the Olympics and was disqualified. And I think, you know, just going back to Nick's question, I think the broad area civil society should agree on is maybe keep the world in the World Cup. Because the World Cup is going to be a test case for the Olympics. And if we don't succeed in drawing the line that everyone has to be able to attend and participate, and that's not a carve-out for athletes, right? The Iran national team has the right to have fans from their country to participate. So it's not just that we're going to let 22 people in and then you're done. That's not the world in the World Cup.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you to Philippe. Yes, I just have two remarks, maybe three. One of them is Maria has not given me a note, but I have heard that she would like you to go down to her. If you are not participating in the farewell dinner and that you have signed off, if you have forgotten whether or not you have signed up for the farewell dinner, also go to Maria and make sure. The other thing is, and more importantly, Natalie sitting over here is controlling all PowerPoints at the whole conference. Please, if you have not sent her your PowerPoint yet, it's time and it's now. You will have a label, I think, so we label people who have not sent PowerPoints. So have a look at your name tag. Make sure you have sent your PowerPoint to Natalie. And the last thing, now we have a break. It's a short one. We're going to the parallel sessions now. Please keep in mind we have many first speakers here at Play the Game this year, which is great. It will be their first time in these kind of settings. Respect them, ask them good questions, keep the dialogue going in the parallel sessions. See you out there. Thank you very much.
Pastor Semenya for the IOC.
Brilliant. Brilliant, yes.